Welcome back, everybody, to the Elijah Thane podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the New Renaissance. But before we get into the New Renaissance, I feel like it would be a good idea to start with a little bit of the Old Renaissance to lay some proper context. So, in the Middle Ages, there was a specific structure that all of the little towns were built in. And they had a cathedral or a church in the center of each little section of the town. And it was usually the tallest building. And then no matter where you were at in the town, you could look towards this building no matter where you're at. And it was marked as the center. This building would normally store all of the knowledge. It would have all of the books. Usually the only people, because this is like right around the time of the Dark Ages. And so the people mostly couldn't read. The people, they had their own crafts, their own skills that they would be working on, the people of the town. But as far as the advanced knowledge, that all pretty much belonged to the church. So the church kept the time for the people. The bells would ring at certain hours of the day. They would keep track of all of the holidays. They would set forth all of the rules. The church was basically the form of government. And many times a day, the people would go to various ceremonies throughout the churches, and they would all be visiting and meeting people in the churches. And so there was a town in Italy, Florence, Italy, and in the Middle Ages, this town started to become like a cultural hub, like a trade hub. And what was so special about Florence at the time is that normally in the rest of the Middle Ages and in the rest of the Dark Ages throughout the rest of the world, there was a noble class, and people basically, you were either born into nobility or you were born a peasant, and there wasn't much chance of getting out of the class that you were born into. Maybe over several generations the peasants could rise up and have a possibility of gaining some sort of nobility, and maybe over a succession of many generations the nobility could be falling out of favor and they could be going down and eventually turn into peasants. But usually the rich stayed rich and the poor stayed poor. But in Florence, something extremely special was happening, and that was the rise of the merchant class. And basically what that meant was that it was the business owners who ran the city, not the nobility. And this is actually where the term snob comes from, because that basically meant they were not noble. And so it was like, you're a snob, you're not noble. It was these rich people who weren't necessarily used to being rich, and so they didn't necessarily know how to behave like the rich people did. But this provided an opportunity for immense economic growth because people from all over the world, it was kind of like how America was at the foundation of America. People saw Florence as a place to go to if you were not born of noble blood, but you could go there to start up your business and perhaps have a little bit of freedom, and you didn't have to live under the oppression of the king. Sure enough, in some places, maybe the king would have a good place and he would provide you all the protection, but some people were willing to take the risk and move to Florence. And one of the ways that the merchant class in Florence operated was they took great pride in their craftsmanship, they took great pride in their industry, they took great pride in their arts, and they were people who wanted to learn, who wanted to learn how to read. And so going to these churches and extracting all the information that they could out of the churches became very popular. I mean, it was popular throughout most of Italy, but in Florence in particular, they were some very ambitious people. So the merchants in Florence had this kind of code to them where you wanted to be a person who brought value to the city, and you kind of had to earn your spot there. And it was basically like if you wanted to be a merchant in Florence, mediocrity was not tolerated. It was basically a total meritocracy where even if you were someone of noble ancestry, that didn't quite cut it in Florence, because there was merchants who perhaps knew their business better, and they were allowed to rise through the ranks and gain control over the city. The merchants would be expected to go travel to different lands, find something of value, find some sort of new information, find some sort of new product, and bring it back to Florence to start growing the economy. And this was just the standard. So they were very ambitious people, and in all of Christendom and all of Europe, it was like the place to be if you were an ambitious entrepreneur. And in the 1200s, there was a very ambitious project that was started to be built. As Florence started to grow, they decided, let's build a cathedral. And now Milan had a cathedral, Pisa had a cathedral, but they said, we want to build a cathedral bigger than all of the other cathedrals around. We want to build something that will show off the Florentine spirit, show how ambitious we all are. And so they started building this like truly massive monumental cathedral. And they had one problem though. They were building it so big that they didn't figure out how to put a roof over the top of it. And so they ended up building all of these walls, and they had the roofs to the major parts of it. But in the central nave, which is like the main hall of the church, it was like 140 feet across or something enormous. And so they couldn't figure out how to put a dome over the top of it. And so for 200 years, whenever it rained, it would just rain down through the massive hole in the floor onto the marble floor inside of the cathedral. And they had no idea, kind of like how the Pantheon has that little hole in the top and it would rain down in and the water would just go off. But this is like the Pantheon on steroids, but without a dome. The rain would just fall and it would just go hit the floor, roll off, and the people, maybe on rainy days, they just canceled mass. I don't know exactly what they did. But either way, they had this massive problem. And they built it knowing that they wouldn't be able to get the dome done because they didn't have the technology, and no dome of any sorts had ever been built before. The largest dome up to that point was the Pantheon. And so for 200 years almost, they were trying to figure out how exactly do we cover the top of the Florence Cathedral, because this was going to be the pride and joy of the Florentine people. It was going to be the ultimate center for the ultimate city that would guide everybody towards the center, the ultimate congregation place. I think they could hold tens of thousands of people in there in the nave for mass. It was like if you haven't seen it, go look up the Florence Cathedral. I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. It's insanely enormous, and even pictures don't really quite do it justice. But anyway, so they had this huge project, but they still couldn't figure out how do they put the dome on the top. And they had various competitions and various attempts over the years, but they could never quite figure it out until in the mid 1400s, in the time of the early Renaissance, there was an artist. Well, he was like a Renaissance man. He was technically actually a goldsmith. He wasn't even an architect. Filippo Brunelleschi. And he came along and said, I have a solution to put the dome on the top of the building. Now, this was kind of typical of the Renaissance man type attitude because he had never built a dome before. But that didn't stop him from being able to throw his hat in the ring and say, hey, I want to give me a shot at this. Put me in, coach. I want to go have a chance to show off my skills. They're like, hey, Brunelleschi, have you ever done this before? Nope, but it couldn't be that hard, could it? That was kind of the attitude of all these people. And Brunelleschi, leading up to this, he was a goldsmith. And so he learned a little bit about casting metals and all of that. And he had a little bit of draftsmanship training, and he was familiar with the arts. He was pretty well read, pretty educated guy. And he goes to Rome to study how all of the Romans built their architecture. He was amazed at the Pantheon. The Pantheon, though, was built with this Roman type of concrete that they didn't really have access to that technology anymore. And they were trying to build this new Florence dome with masonry instead of pouring concrete and having it go up like the Pantheon dome was. They tried to do it with masonry, where basically you're stacking bricks all around until it spirals up to the top, and then boom, you have the massive structure covered. So Brunelleschi goes to Rome and he studies basically every single building that he could possibly get his hands on, and he climbs up to the top. He's measuring them. He's doing all these various makeshift techniques to understand and study how exactly are these buildings built. He goes and takes all of this knowledge that he could possibly find and brings it back to Florence and says, I have a solution to cover the dome. So he walks into they're having this competition in Florence. Hey, who can build the dome? We have some money set aside. Florence is doing pretty good. Business is booming. The merchant class is growing in the ranks. We're succeeding. Down with the nobility, down with the bureaucrats. Time for this new merchant class. Let's invest some of our money and cap off this dome once and for all, making it the largest dome in the world. And Filippo Brunelleschi walks in and says, I have a solution. They said, well, show us your solution. He said, I can't, because I don't want someone to steal my idea and run off. So they were like, well, we can't just give you this commission without you proving to us how exactly we're going to be building this. So he brings in an egg. And he says, all right, everybody, here is this egg, and we have this little marble table here. Can any of the architects in this room balance the egg on top of the marble table to where it doesn't fall over? And so all the architects come up and they lay the egg down, and it keeps falling over, keeps falling over. And he says, if I could get this egg to stand straight up, will you give me the commission? They said, there's no way he's going to get the egg to stand up, but sure enough, yeah, if you get the eggs to stand up, we'll give you the commission. So he takes the egg, hits it against the table, cracks the bottom of it, creating a little flat spot. Boom, the egg perfectly balances. And all the other architects threw out into an outrage. They were like, oh my goodness, this is just so crazy. Why would you let him do it just based off of that? That's so simple. We could have come up with the same thing. He said, but you didn't come up with the same thing. And that's what you're going to say whenever I propose a solution to covering the top of the dome, is that, that was so simple, we could have come up with it anyways. And Brunelleschi basically, these Renaissance men were extremely braggadocious. They were extremely arrogant. And he basically goes in there and says, bow down before my superior ideas. I am the one who could get the job done. All of you architects are fake. I'm not even an architect yet, but I'm about to prove to you that I will surpass all of you in your architectural abilities on my first project. So they ended up giving Filippo Brunelleschi the job. After 16 long years and tremendous effort on the part of almost everybody in Florence chipped in one way or another to get this dome built. After 16 long years, sure enough, they built this incredible, monumental masterpiece of architecture. To this day, it is still the biggest masonry dome in the world. It dwarfed the Pantheon whenever it was built. And if you go to Florence, everywhere you go in Florence, the dome just dominates the skyline. And you could be walking around in the streets, turn the corner, and boom, right there is the dome. You could be up on the mountain looking around, no matter where you see what part of the skyline you're looking at, you could just see this massive dome. I mean, you could fit several buildings inside of the dome of how big it is. And that was just the spirit of the times. And so that became the ultimate symbol. And after that dome got put, Florence overtook Pisa, Florence overtook Milan, and Florence basically became the absolute uncontended winner of the center of the High Renaissance. And it lasted that way for a very long time, all the way up until Rome took it over later on in the late 1500s. But so why are we talking about this dome whenever we're talking about the New Renaissance? Because this is the attitude that happened that gave way to this tremendous growth of not just economic growth for Florence at the time, not just military power, but the arts and the crafts and the cultures had a significant rebirth from the old classical ideas. That's actually what the word Renaissance means. It means the rebirth. And what was being reborn? It was these old ancient ideas. And that's exactly how Brunelleschi went and figured out how to do it. Was by going back and figuring out how old people did this and like figure out, okay, what did the Romans and the Greeks, how did they build their awesome architecture? Because there was a long period throughout the Dark Ages where, I mean, yeah, in certain parts of the Dark Ages, they were building amazing structures, but people had become illiterate and people didn't, the projects that were being built were not, they felt like they weren't quite measuring up to the standards of what was happening in ancient Greece and Rome. And so they wanted to try to one up everybody that was in the area at the time, but also even perhaps surpass the ancients who came before them. And the only way they figured out how to do this was to go back and study from the ancients. One of the things that happened in particular that gave way to this sort of attitude was the printing press. And whenever they started being able to have printed documents, people started to be able to read, and they started to be able to print things in people's native language as opposed to just the Latin, which was controlled by the church. And so then people were able to spread ideas much faster. There was a resurgence in interest in old ancient books and old ancient techniques. And basically the times leading up to this, whenever Florence was becoming this centerpiece of all the trade and the whole entire Renaissance world, that all of the merchant class, they wanted to become as educated and as smart as possible. And there was this freedom of information that was starting to grow, because these people would go travel to these distant lands the same way that Brunelleschi would go travel to Rome and study all the architecture. All these merchant class families would go send out people, and they would literally pay people to go out to all these old monasteries, collect and gather up all these old books, all these old libraries, And they would say, how do we bring back the best knowledge that we possibly can from the people who came before us? And so these people started, investing into libraries and finding out all the different ways that they could bring all this knowledge back to them and then teach that to their children, so their children could get a head start, and the generations just became smarter and smarter and smarter really, really fast. So this interest in antiquity, this return to antiquity, and this rebirth of antiquity was like the beating heart of everything that caused this massive growth period in Florence, Italy. And the dome stood as the ultimate symbol of what could be accomplished by someone who wasn't necessarily qualified to get the job done first. But the only thing that really qualified these people to do it was an intense can-do attitude. I mean, these people could not be told no. And they were like, they weren't necessarily trying to be nice. They didn't have all these weird rules that the nobility had. They weren't held back by all these weird bureaucratic systems. They were extremely ambitious. So the only rules that held them back was, what are the laws of physics? What type of information do I have that I could learn, or what type of information do I have access to, or can I gain access to, that will allow me to accomplish my goals? So that was really the main point. It wasn't based off of like, oh, this is my mom and my dad, and this is my grandparents, and so that's why I'm in this special position. It's like, no, I'm going to work really hard, and that's what's going to make me successful. It's not based off of what situation I was born into. Like Bill Gates says, if you're born poor, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But if you die poor, that is your fault, because in this world today, it's very similar to how the ancient world is. They started to have this like surgence of access to information, and today, in this day and age, we also have a crazy amount of access to information through the internet. And there's basically no excuse to not be able to learn anything today because of, you could just go online and look up anything. And so that's how these people felt in this time. It was the first time in a very long period of time where you could actually go and have access to information that would give you an upper hand on all of your competition. And so they would go study all of these old books, and they would even, some of the central merchant families, like the Medici family, for example, who played a significant part in funding the dome and getting the project started, they would go build these libraries and send these people out to go gather the books. But they would even create schools to go teach people and gather all of the artists together and teach them all of these ancient ideas. They would teach them like sacred geometry, sacred proportion. They would go study ancient religion. They would just study everything they possibly could to give them all of the information to build the best possible things. And that was their goal, is to build like creativity, not productivity, was the most high. It wasn't like how much could you produce, it was how good you could produce. And so if you could produce at a high quality and at a high quantity, that was a really good thing. But if you could not produce in a high quantity, they would much rather take quality over that. And a really good example of this is there was a set of bronze doors that they were trying to, so for the Florence Cathedral, they had this building, this outbuilding for it. So here's a cathedral, and then right next to it is this other building, and it was called the baptistry, and that's where they would take basically every baby that was born in Florence to go there and get baptized. And they wanted to go also, they spent an insane amount of money before the dome was ever even built. They wanted to get a really bling set of bronze doors to put onto this baptistry. And Brunelleschi and another artist called Ghiberti, they had they both entered in this competition to go figure out who could design the best bronze doors. Ghiberti won, and that's why whenever Ghiberti won the competition, he designed the doors. He took 40 years to build the doors, and it was just a set of doors, but that's how much time they put into. It's better to just have one set of doors that's really good than to have a whole bunch of doors that are And that's one of the things that you will notice going to Florence is like, oh my goodness, these doors are amazing. That's one of the things that's really amazing, is just how the doors are big, they're ornate, each one has character. But so Brunelleschi, he goes, and after he loses that competition, he goes to Rome, studies, and then he builds a dome. The Medicis were going and taking all this information. They were training these people. They trained people like Leonardo da Vinci. They trained people like Michelangelo. They trained people like Giorgio Vasari. Giorgio Vasari was the one who actually painted the inside of the dome. And Giorgio Vasari was also the guy who was like the podcaster of the day. He goes around, and the reason we know all this information is because Giorgio Vasari goes around. He was Michelangelo's pupil, and he says, I'm going to go around and interview all of the artists of the time and hear all the stories of what they're up to and write a book. And so Vasari wrote the book called The Lives of the Artists. So he was not just an artist, but he also was an author. And so so all these people, they had these like really Renaissance type attitudes. That's where the Renaissance man came from, is just like someone who wants to excel in everything. It was like they were all polymaths, basically. Like they were experts in across multiple domains, and they wanted to basically synthesize all the different fields of knowledge towards their one particular craft. And the Medicis were people who gave them ability to do that through making all of these schools that you could go, like the Florentine Academy, the Florentine Neoplatonic Academy, where they would go train these people. Now, they had these, the way of teaching was very different than the way of teaching today. Like, so in this school that the Medicis built, where they would train all of these artists, by the time the artist was, before he was even a teenager, they would go apprentice under a master, and they would start learning their craft, and they would learn basically hands on the job. There wasn't like this formal college system like we have today. The education system was very hands-on learning. And then usually once you graduated from your apprenticeship, you would become a journeyman, and you would go take on a couple crafts, kind of like similar how unions and things work today. And then eventually you become a master, and you'd be able to open up your own school. But the thing is like these masters, they weren't just teaching one skill. They were teaching a synthesis of all of the knowledge that was passed down to them through all of these different systems of, whether it be the like mythology, religious stories, mathematics, geometry, science, basically anything that they get their hands on. They tried to pour all of that in there. I mean, like if you go look at the Florence Cathedral, on the outside they have these weird like metal structures that look like they're like these weird ancient timekeeping devices, and they cast, like at a certain point where the sun is in the sky, they cast shadows onto the building at different points where they measure, and they say, all right, whenever the sun and the shadow hits this spot, it's this holiday. Whenever the sun and the shadow hits this spot, it's this holiday. They would align the buildings with the planets and the stars from the precession of the equinox. They would align the buildings with all the different with all the different passings of time to make these buildings like literally the building itself contained knowledge. And so they all went to this, there was like a clear hierarchy of information and a clear hierarchy of value, and the church kind of held all of that. But then, so what does this have to do with the modern day Renaissance, and what does this have to do with the modern world now? Well, clearly that is not the way that the world works today. I mean, in most towns, you don't have, maybe in some small towns you still have the churches, but in the big cities, what are the tallest buildings now? It's like insurance companies or banks or things like that. And so, the like how in the Bible says, love of money is the root of all evil. I mean, these people in the Renaissance were extremely rich, but they weren't like, let's just make money for the sake of making money, like how the insurance companies and the banks would be doing today. Money to them was a means to an end. It wasn't the end result. Like, you weren't just trying to stack up money arbitrarily. You were trying to stack up money to point it all towards a higher cause. These people, at least in Florence, Italy, and most of Christendom, decided that the higher cause would be something related to the divine, something related to God, something related to the church. But so now if we fast forward to the time we're in today, and we see how the world, our regular worldview is structured, and how our societies are set up, we're not growing up in the same environment, and people aren't trying these ambitious projects. I mean, you would think that today there would be a bigger masonry dome that was built other than the masonry dome that was built in the 1400s. But no, that was the biggest one. And when you go step inside these buildings, it's really hard to believe that we're more advanced than these people who lived in that time period. I mean, like, how many buildings today do you walk into and it like genuinely makes your jaw drop, and it's just like, oh my God, this is amazing. I mean, how many buildings really just truly captivate you and magnetize you and pull you in? How many buildings did we build in America that draw millions and millions of tourists from all across the world every single year to go look at this and just be like, wow, that is amazing? Not that many. But in the Renaissance times, for some reason, and in the Baroque times, for some reason, everybody just, they wanted to build things like even like a set of doors, for example, where people just want to go and say, wow, let's go stand and look at these doors for like 6 hours and try to understand what it means. And they put like a different emphasis. They had a slower way of life. They made less things, but they made better things. And they had a very enchanted worldview, and people were like, "Oh, those people were superstitious." Those people, they believed in angels and demons and all these weird little things that we have a scientific worldview now. We're so much more sophisticated. But I think one of the things I'm getting at is that there's this disenchanted worldview we have, where we don't produce beautiful things. At least we don't at the same ratio to beautiful things that were produced back then. It's more about mass production than craft production. And so whenever I grew up, I grew up in America. So I didn't grow up in this town, Florence. Whenever I visited it really blew my mind because it made me realize what was truly possible. But I grew up kind of cut off from big culture, and I was also kind of cut off from big city too. So it was like a really rural town, not really too much grandiose, spectacular, magnificent pieces of architecture, wonderful pieces of art. It was kind of a simple way of living. But I didn't really experience the beauty. And so like even in almost every single area of life, it was this disenchanted, watered down version of what the ancients had spent all of their time and energy trying to build. Like the buildings, they were just built based off functionality. The schools, they teach all the kids the same thing. It's not like, hey, this kid is good at that, teach him this particular craft. This kid is good at that, teach him this particular craft. It was like, just teach all the kids the same thing. And then when they get to college, they'll specialize, so on and so forth. It was just a really strange world and very different compared to how these people grew up. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily harder to grow up now, because these people who were in the ancient times had a way, way harder life. I mean, it was brutal. It was like stab or get stabbed in those times with regards to, I mean, how brutal people were, and there was a lot less law and order. So yeah, maybe today we have a little bit more structure in society and things are a little bit more well organized, but they're also kind of sterilized a little bit. I mean, even like the religion. So I grew up and my family was basically, a kind of a Protestant type family. And the stories that they were told were not really connected to ancient, like wasn't told like, hey, here's this Bible story and here's how it's connected to all the different cross-cultural parallels of ancient mythology. Here's how the church followers established the Bible. Here's how the church was established. Here's all the history. Here's how the church that we go to, the structure of the building tells a story. Here's how it aligns with the planets and the stars. Here's all of the information in the world gathered to you. And now you're going to go pick a particular craft when you grow up. You're going to take all this information, synthesize it, pour it all into your particular craft. So every single item you produce will be an item of goodness, truth, and beauty that mirrors the wholeness of the whole entire world in this one particular object. That wasn't the case at all. And so it was just kind of like this really robotic education system that was, just trained you more to sit down, sit in line, shut up, go through the motions, get out, get your degree. I mean, like literally they teach you to think inside of a box. Whenever you graduate from college, they put a box on your head with a little crown that goes over top your head and says, congratulations, you're educated. You could now officially think inside of the box. That wasn't exactly how they went about it at all in the Renaissance times. I mean, if you look at the stuff today that they're building with all these people with degrees who are like, oh, I have a degree in architecture, and they make this horrendous looking buildings, and they with this brutalist postmodern type architecture that they build now. And this is all built by people with degrees. We think inside of the box. Now we have a particular type of education that's really amazing. But all of these buildings and all these amazing accomplishments of the Renaissance times were built by people who actually weren't qualified to do it. They didn't have any formal degrees. They had their training in their specialized field, and oftentimes they would branch out from that because they would say, I like Brunelleschi said, I'm a goldsmith. I was trained in goldsmithing. I wanted to build these gold and bronze doors, but I want to go bigger than that. Let's just build a whole dome, like when Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, they all had like I do painting, but I also do sculpture. I also do architecture. I study how the human body works. Like, they wanted to study everything. And there was, in school today, they teach you, here is a prescribed set of questions that you have to answer about the information we're giving you. And the Renaissance, it was like, what questions do you have about the way the world works? Well, go out and find out what that means. And so it was like a very, it was a curiosity based, like it was a very enchanted worldview. It's like, the world is your oyster. Go out there and figure out how it works. Go out there and like carve your own path. And that was what happened in the Renaissance of Florence, because up until that point, the peasants weren't really able to carve their own path. And I feel like that's something like that is similar as to what's happening today. It's where you grow up not believing in your ability to carve your own path. And I think that's one of the things that results in ultimate nihilism. At least, I can't speak for other people, but I can speak for myself. And that's what happened to me. So I grew up and I had this very nihilistic worldview as I started entering my late teenage years. And then by the time I was a young adult, I was extremely nihilistic, because nobody ever told me that it was possible to use your creativity to flourish and to use your creativity to just explore the world, to have a grand adventure. I mean, like, I didn't want structure. I mean, yeah, like, I needed structure growing up, and like every kid needs structure. But I didn't necessarily need a prescribed life path. I didn't need a specific corporate ladder to climb up. What I needed was a grand adventure. You know, I wanted to go out and slay a dragon. I wanted to go out and save a damsel in distress. There were so many different things that I wanted to do. I wanted to go visit foreign lands. I wanted to go into the dark forest. I wanted to learn the secrets of the ancients. But they tell you, oh, the world's already figured out. We already know how everything works. It's kind of like the Truman Show. Why try travel? Everything's already figured out. Why learn? We already know everything. Just stay in your little box. Stay in your little house. Do this, do that. We already know what to do. There's no reason to go out and have an adventure. Just do the same thing that everybody else is doing. And I just thought, is this really it? Is that really, like, is this what we're supposed to do with our lives? And I didn't know that it was possible to do anything else. And so whenever I was in school, I would just be sitting there and I'd just be drawing. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to draw. I wouldn't pay attention. I literally got kicked out of every single school I ever attended. I mean, I would just get so bored. If they would bitch at me for drawing in class, I would just get up and leave, because I was like, I'm not going to go to class anymore. This is just so stupid. And so I didn't even graduate high school. And so I tried to work a bunch of different jobs. I went to all these different, I worked like fast food, I worked manual labor jobs, and almost every single job, if I didn't get fired, I would quit before I even had a chance to get fired, because it was so boring. It was like, I'm working at a fast food restaurant. It's like, what are we doing here today? What is our mission? And they're like, shut up, do this, do that, and then you clock out. And I was like, well, what do I have to contribute to here? Doesn't matter, just do the job how you're supposed to do it. It's like, what type of creativity can I pour in that? Doesn't matter, just do the job. You go to a manual labor job. What are we building here? What is the meaning of this? What is the purpose of what we're building? Doesn't matter. Just do your job. So everything was very meaningless. There was no bigger purpose. There was no synthesis of all of the ideas of all the world poured into this one particular project. Like a painter, he would pour his whole entire philosophy, his whole entire worldview into a painting. So whenever you looked at it, you were stepping inside of the mind of his life's work. And it was just, that's how you would, when you step inside of a building, when you would grab a door handle, you'd say, oh my God, this door handle is just so beautiful. This meal that this chef made is just the most beautiful. It's made with food that was grown in the land and not food that came out of a factory. And it's this family recipe that's been passed down. And there's a reason why they have every ingredient. But that's not how any of the restaurants I worked at. That's not how the manual labor jobs. So I basically just was like, fuck it. I just gave up hope. And I thought, like, there's no point in even really trying anymore, because I don't see anything worth trying for. And then because I grew up in this little small town where everything was just there was nothing that pointed towards something really truly cosmic and inspirational. There was a call to adventure, but I didn't even really know where to go. And then in my early 20s, I don't even know how it happened, but I happened to stumble. I was visiting Washington, D.C., and I happened to stumble across the National Gallery of Art. Whenever I walked through those doors, I saw a Leonardo da Vinci painting for the first time. And I walked up and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like this in person. I was just staring at it. It's like, this is the most amazing thing ever. Look at the details. Look at the love he painted it. And then I walked around the back. Oh my God, he painted the back of the painting too. This is just amazing. He didn't even want you to just look at the front. The back was equally important. I got to see some Peter Paul Rubens, some Rembrandts. I was like, dude, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen. There was these massive columns up on the second floor. There was this huge rotunda, and these columns were, I don't even know how big. You couldn't even fit your arm around them. These columns are so big. These big black stacked marble columns, and they just enormous go up. It's like, I've never seen anything like this before in my life. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And like literally, I walked out those doors knowing I am going to be a Renaissance painter. I had no idea how to do it. Have you ever done it before? Nope. I was a tattoo artist at the time, and because I always had this knack for drawing, and the tattooing was one of the ways I could kind of experience my entrepreneurship, and I could express my artistic ability up to a certain point. I get to draw, get to meet people, kind of make my own business and do all that. But the call to adventure didn't really. I don't have anything against tattooing, because I mean there's some tattoo artists who really genuinely are they are amazing artists, but I was not the amazing tattoo artist. For me, there was something about tattooing that it just didn't have the creative freedom that I wanted. I wanted to do something where for tattooing you have to do something where you're doing it for the other person, and it's kind of based off of whatever ideas they have, and I wanted to do something based off of the ideas that I had. And then because I grew up hearing all these Bible stories, and I grew up hearing all these history stories, in the history books, but they never really like came to life for me. They never drew me in. But whenever I went to the National Gallery of Art, you see this massive painting of George Washington. And it's like, oh my God. And you could just stand in front of him like, George Washington, there you are. This is amazing. And, you could hear a Bible story, and you could read it in the Bible, and your imagination could be turning. You could just have all these vivid images. But then you see some weird, painting of it. A modern rendition of it. It's like, oh yuck, like that's not how I was picturing it in my head. But then you see these Renaissance masters and these Baroque masters. It's like, oh my God, this is how I pictured it in my head. I didn't know it was possible to do stuff like that. So yeah, I was super excited, and I was like, I want to do this. And so I sold my car. Actually, I was like, I am going to sell my car to go learn how to paint, because I know that I'm going to, because I was making I was making a decent living being a tattoo artist, and I was like, I just kind of want to give up this and go all in on learning how to paint, even though I had never picked up a paintbrush really before. And I was like, I just want to figure out how to become a master Renaissance painter. I didn't even know that, I had no idea it was possible. So I sold my car, figured I'll just, I was living with my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, hey, I'm just letting you know, I'm selling my car. I'm gonna use this money to pay the bills for a while. I'm just gonna basically stay at the house and do nothing other than learn how to paint. So I found some pictures of Leonardo da Vinci painted. I found some pictures of Michelangelo painted. I found some pictures of Raphael painted. I got a couple books from the gift store at the National Gallery of Art. I started just remaking all these paintings, and I had a knack for it. I was doing pretty good, and but I didn't really know exactly what to do with it afterwards. But then I was like, well, I gotta figure out more. Like, I have these paintings, but I don't know what to do with them. What did these artists do with these paintings? Because I painted the paintings, but there's no money coming in. Like. What's next? Like, woo, I made a Leonardo da Vinci remake. It kind of looks like what Leonardo da Vinci did, not as good, but okay, I'm learning. But what do I do now that I have it here? And so I was like, I got to figure out what these artists did. Because if I don't figure out what they did and how they became successful, I'm going to starve to death, because I'm running out of car money here. All of, my money that I got from selling my car was just, was going away. So I started reading art history. And then I started going down the rabbit hole. And whenever I started going down the art history rabbit hole, it was truly mind-blowing of the reading stuff like Giorgio Vasari's Lives of the Artists, but also going through, I read basically every art history book that I got my hands on. My whole entire home library now is like 90% art history books. So I read everything that I possibly could about art history, went totally down the rabbit hole, and it opened up the door to what was possible. And basically the same model that Florentines had. You got to go out there, and you got to basically go out to a new land, gather some new information, and bring that back to your hometown and share that with them. And that's where the value is created, because people in your hometown, if they haven't traveled out, they're stuck in the same ways, the same way the nobility from the Middle Ages was stuck in the same ways. It's like, this is what my parents taught me, what my parents taught me, what my parents taught me. And eventually you have a whole society of people that are all doing stuff, and they have a very particular way of doing things. We put the Christmas tree up at this time of year, and we decorate it with these type of things. And on Easter, we do this type of thing. And you ask any of them, hey, why do you why do you worship the Easter Bunny on Christmas? I'm just kidding. You don't really worship the Easter Bunny. But you would say, like, well, what's up with Santa Claus? What's up with these Christmas trees? And they say, I don't know. That's just why we did it. Hey, why do we learn this in school? I don't know. That's just why we did it. Hey, why do you do this? Why do we do this a certain way in our hometown? Oh, that's just the way we did it. And so I was like, well, I want to know why we're doing the things the way that we're doing. Because what if we're doing the things in the way that we're doing and it's actually not the optimal way to do it? Because the education system, everything, the religious system, everything that was set up just seemed to be totally failing me. But there was like this call to adventure to go out and find something new, find something like, let's go out and I wanted to go have that like return to antiquity, because that's one of the things that the Renaissance artists were obsessed with. Why are we doing the things that we're doing? And why are we doing it the way that we're doing them? And if there is a better way, let's find out if so. So they would go back as far back as they could in history and figure out, okay, when did this idea start? Boom, 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 boom. Did it degrade or did it blossom over time? And if it degraded, then they would say, how do we make this better? How do we return back to before it degraded? If it's blossoming, they would say, how do we keep pushing our resources and our energy and our time and efforts into this thing that is continually unfolding in a progressive manner that is beneficial to society? And so after going down this art history rabbit hole, one of the patterns that I noticed with all of the books is that, it starts off, you have like prehistoric cave art, and then you have, like some basic primitive art, and then you have like, some ancient religious art. And then that builds and builds and builds, and they get better and better and better. And then boom, the Renaissance happens, and oh my goodness. So like you have like Greek and Roman art, but the problem with Greek and Roman art is like a lot of the paintings didn't survive. But you have their architecture which survived, which you could see, like, you just imagine, like if you see how magnificent those architectural structures are, you could imagine like how cool these paintings must have been. I mean, one of the places that is preserved pretty well is Pompeii. And I don't know if you've ever seen the murals from Pompeii, but the color is just, it's really, really beautiful. The composition is beautiful, all of that. So, I mean, there had to have been good painters. But so they go and they try to figure out, how do we do this amazing? How do we learn? How do we make this better? So I wanted to go, but so you go and you learn, and the painting gets better. The Renaissance happened. It gets basically the best it's ever been. The Baroque happens. They start to elaborate and fractionalize this style. They come up with all these variations on it, and they said, like, this is basically like, you can't get any better than this. And then there's this new scientific revolution. You have like Descartes and the Enlightenment, and then all of these new ideas happen where it's basically like, we have a way where we figure out the world works, where these old ancient people were just superstitious. We don't really need their ways anymore. And so you have like, everything was not about building up anymore. Everything was deconstruct. Art became this very weird, like, deconstructed form of art. Buildings became this weird, very deconstructed form of buildings. And like, you see the Industrial Revolution, and so you see all these factories. You see like mass production, and you see the crafts, the quality of the craftsmanship in almost everything go down. There's no longer pride in craftsmanship. And then so at the end of art history book, like, it builds up this big crescendo in the middle. It's like, oh my God, and everything is so beautiful. And then at the end, it's like, oh, yuck, these paintings suck. The buildings suck. Like the whole entire realm of the modern art world sucks. And I was like, man, why does it always end in such a sad way? Like, why are the buildings not inspiring? Like, why are our homes not inspiring? Why is our cars not inspiring? Like, why don't we get inspired just by the ordinary things? Like, we have this very disenchanted worldview. Like, we don't see the world with a sense of adventure. We don't see the world with a sense of purpose. Or at least I didn't see the world that way. And so then I went and I visited Florence and Rome. And I was like, I got to go see this stuff in person. I'm tired of reading about it in books. So I go to Florence and Rome. It was amazing. I could go into hours and hours and hours talking about all the experiences in Florence and Rome, but basically it was just total immersion. I learned that they still have this love for handcrafted, for the meticulous attention to detail. I mean, like, here's one of the examples of how cool Florence is. They will not let a McDonald's come into the historic center of Florence. Like, all the McDonald's have to stay on the outskirts. And McDonald's has offered them lots of money. Hey, look, we can make a lot of money here, so we'll even give you a premium. And they're like, no, because we don't want to ruin it. We'd rather have this little mom and pop shop that's been here for 1,000 years, 500 years. Like, we'd rather focus on that than to have this McDonald's in there, because they don't want to ruin the atmosphere and they don't want to ruin the vibe. And so they have a very slower way of life there. They do less, but they do more in quality. And to me, that was just like, oh, that's what I was missing. I want to do less. I'm so tired of trying to be productive, but not being creative. And so I learned some tricks. I learned some things from the Italians about their slow way of life, about doing less, but doing more with doing less, paying attention to the details, not focusing so much on mass production, but just putting all of your effort into one thing. But I noticed something, that that this is not just something that I have felt, but this is something that I've noticed that a lot of people have felt, and a lot of people I've talked to, they have this disenchanted worldview that I had, and they don't find inspiration, they don't find meaning in their job. And a lot of times people don't even know why they're working at their job, other than the fact that they have to pay the bills. And that's just the way that we've been doing things. They don't really know why they're learning what they're learning in school. They don't know why they celebrate all the holidays they celebrate. They don't know why they make things a certain way. But it's just like, that's the way they're made. And so we're building all of these things, we're doing all these things, but we don't have a particular reason as to why we're doing them. And I wanted to go back to this intentionality with my life. And so now, how does this connect into the new Renaissance? Like, is there actually a new Renaissance happening? And I believe there is, because we have something very special that these people in the original Renaissance did not have. The way that the original Renaissance, where they had access to books and they had access to information in a new way, and that gave rise to a new care about intentionality with all of your actions, because you had access to more information. And it wasn't just like, hey, do this because we told you to do this. It was like, I want to do this in a way that is meaningful. So this is the same way that I want to do this in a way that's meaningful, in a way that actually makes sense based off of the information I have, not make sense just based off of because someone said so. And I feel like in America, something like that is happening, and maybe all across the world. I can't speak for the rest of the world, because I mean, I could really only speak for my fellow Americans. But I've noticed that with the rise of the digital age, we have access now to all of the information of the whole entire world at our fingertips. I'm looking for a phone to grab. My phone's over there. But so like through a laptop, you could just hop onto the internet and you could find all of the information of all of the world, and you could find out, like, you could really be curious again. And it's like, you don't have to have somebody tell you which questions to ask. You could just ask your own questions. Hey Google, or hey Grok, or whatever. You could just ask your questions, and then you could get these answers. And so, there's this biblical principle: ask and you shall receive. And so this access to information, yes, it is making some people stupider. I do believe that, because some people are just asking really stupid questions and really meaningless questions. And you ask stupid and meaningless questions, and you'll get stupid and meaningless answers. But for the people who feel like there is something more, I'm missing out. For those people, they're asking better and better and better questions, and they're getting better and better and better answers. And one of the things that you start to do when you start to go down these rabbit holes and you start to figure out, like, instead of like just going through the motions, you really go deep down inside. You look inside, but you don't just look inside. You go outside and you look up and you look at the stars. You ask questions like, why am I feeling this? Why are we doing this the way we're doing? Where did we come from? How did the moon get there? You ask big questions, really, really fun questions. Questions that you used to ask when you were a kid before you got told to stop asking stupid questions, which I don't think those type of questions are stupid at all. Those are some of the best questions you could possibly ask. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Why are we doing this? Why are things this way? How exactly did this problem start? How do I fix this problem? That's the best question. Well, I mean, that's not the best, but there's also different types of questions that you could ask. So you could go down these rabbit holes, and eventually it starts leading you back, farther and farther in history, and you start to understand patterns. And so I think there's a rise of the antiquarians, a rise of the people who could go back through history and say, look, throughout history, you don't have to have all of these modern theories, these modern economic theories of, hey, look, things will work this way because some person with a degree told us that this building will be better if we build it this way. Some person with a degree told us this, that, and the other. It's like, you don't even have to have any theories anymore. You could just go back and learn through history and recognize patterns. And you can say, hey, here's what worked and what didn't. Here's exactly how we got to why we are today. Here's exactly why we do this thing. And then you can decide once and for all, are you going to keep doing it this way? Or are you going to do something different? And I feel like a lot of people are kind of fed up with modernity. A lot of people are disenchanted with brutalism and postmodernism. And a lot of people do not, if you ask most people, how much trust do you have in the universities? Ask people, how much trust do you have in religious institutions? How much trust do you have in the government? How much trust do you have in the pharmaceutical industry? I mean, these are good questions to ask. And I think a lot of people are actually starting to trust them less and less and less because we're just doing things and doing things and doing things and we don't know why we're doing them. And that's the thing. The people in the Renaissance, whenever they were doing stuff with an intentionality. There's a really, I would like to end on this story. You have 3 bricklayers. And the one bricklayer you go up to him and you say, hey, Mr. Bricklayer, sir, what exactly are you doing? And this guy's like, I'm just doing my job. Okay. Why are you doing that? To pay the bills. You go up to another guy. Hey, excuse me, Mr. Bricklayer, sir, what are you doing? I'm laying bricks. What does it look like I'm doing? Okay, well, why are you laying the bricks? Because I don't have any other choices. That's just what you do around here. But you go up to the 3rd bricklayer and he's like, oh my God, look at this brick. Oh, it fits perfectly. He's putting like in the mortar and oh man, that's perfect. It's amazing. I love this brick. It's so beautiful. Oh, here's the next brick. Oh my God, I love this brick even more than the last one. This brick is so amazing. Oh, this brick is the best. Put that there. And oh my God, you have all these amazing bricks. Look how beautifully they're lined. Those 2 people get fired. This guy keeps getting promoted and promoted, and eventually he is the master architect. That guy is the Brunelleschi of the day. And you ask that guy, why are you laying the bricks, sir? And he says, I'm so glad you asked. I'm laying the bricks because I'm building a cathedral. I'm building a dome. And my ancestors started this, and my descendants will finish this. There is a succession of progress that is happening over multiple generations where it all has meaning and it all points towards something. And there is a reason why we're doing this. And we're not just doing this just to go through the motions of life. We're doing this because we care about it and because it's going to be beautiful and because it inspires people. That's the bricklayer that everybody wants to be friends with. That's the bricklayer that's going to change the world because he's doing something with meaning. Even if he doesn't change the world on a grand scale, which I would argue he is changing the world on a grand scale, he's changed his world. And for him, that's all that matters because every single person he comes in contact with, then he changes their world just by contact. He walks into every single room like God sent him there. He walks into every single room with a purpose and a meaning towards life. And that was the attitude of the Renaissance man. They walked into things with intention and purpose. And it wasn't like, I'm just going to do things because this is the way we've done them. It's like, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of time to find out how exactly did we get in this predicament that we got, because things just fall apart on their own accord. And nobody can deny that. You buy a car. There is one way to have a car in mint condition right out of the factory, but there is an infinite number of ways that that car could fall apart. And so there was an infinite number of ways that things could fall apart, but everybody could agree there is only one way to draw a perfect circle. There is only one way to draw a perfect square. If it starts to go a little bit too long this way, it becomes a rectangle. If it starts to get squashed a little bit, it becomes an oval. Things have a perfect form. This is what the Renaissance artists were onto whenever they started going back into the Neoplatonic schools and they started rediscovering, like, what was Plato onto? What were these ancients onto? What were the ancient Israelites and the ancient Hebrew people onto? What were the ancient Mesopotamian people onto? What were they trying to do? How did they build these big monuments? What did the Greeks do? What did the Romans do? How did they know so much? How did they build things that were so awesome? And I think those are the questions that we need to start asking now. Because when you look at the things we're building now, I doubt most people could say, how are these houses being built so amazingly beautiful today? Why is there just so many beautiful things everywhere I look? I mean, if you could go to nature, of course you could find beautiful things, because nature is always going to be beautiful. But the man-made things, that's our job, is to take care of the world and to make beautiful things, because we need to make it in the same way, because they all studied nature. All these people, they learned their principles of design from nature. That's the best place to go, because like I said, the only laws they were held back by were the laws of nature, basically physics. So if nature is so beautiful and so majestic, why should our buildings be at such a clash with nature? You know, it's like, if the outdoors are so good, why does mankind spend so much time perfecting the indoors? I would argue we're not really perfecting the indoors anymore. I mean, you ask them like, hey, I just got a new house, how do you make it beautiful? Well, you want to have lots of natural light. You want to bring plants in there, pictures of landscapes and things like that. It's like, so basically you're telling me the outside is more beautiful than the inside. Like, where were things designed to delight and to move the people, to charm the people, to get the people to ask questions, to get the people to wonder, how was this done? How is this so amazing? How is this beautiful? And so I think that there is, along with the declining trust in modernity, I can't really say that word very well, along with the declining trust in the modern worldview and the world systems that we have set up today, I think there is a renewal of the enchanted worldview, where people are saying, you know, I'm not really digging this. And I think that there's a better way to do this. And I'm going to keep going back through history and through all the pages of all the books that I can find. We'll go watch all the videos I can. And I'm going to learn and figure out why exactly are we doing the things we're doing in the way we're doing. How do we get in this predicament? And then what can we do now to make it better? And I think that's the ultimate idea of the new Renaissance. I think you're seeing that today in the world, and we live in probably the most crazy time to be alive that's possibly conceivable. You have the internet, you could learn anything you can, but also you have all, so this is in 2025. The world is in shambles. The world is also amazing, beautiful things are happening. But I mean, it's just like every day, like there's just the access to news also makes it seem much worse than what it is. But I mean, just governments are just totally flipping on their heads, and the people aren't really, like, the people are becoming more and more divided on what is the right way to fix things. But one of the things that they're all in agreement is that something needs to be fixed. So yeah, we have various views on how exactly to fix things, and I don't know if we're ever going to get to the bottom of that. That's probably not ever going to happen. But one of the things that is within our control is to learn from the old, from like the ancient books. Learn from the people who came before us. Learn from our ancestors. Like, go way, way, way back to the beginning of time, to the beginning of like, go back to the cave paintings, and then work your way forward. Go back to the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, figure out what were they doing, and then work your way forward. Like, you know, like Vitruvius, the best Roman architect, the most famous Roman architect of all time. I'm reading his book right now, the 10 Books on Architecture, and this is something that almost every single Renaissance artist was required reading material for them. And Vitruvius, he had certain systems set up of like, here's how you design your towns, here's how where the pool goes, here's where the bathhouses go, here's where the church goes, here's where this goes, that temple goes, this house goes, that house goes, and here's when this has to face east, this has to face west. If it's a dry place, you have to have it like this. If it's a wet place, you have to have it like this. And depending on what type of materials you have access to, you build it like this, like that, and the other. There was like a whole system set up and a reason why everything was done the way it is. Now we don't really have those reasons. And so I think for this return to the new Renaissance is people starting to do stuff with much more intentionality. People are becoming much more health conscious. They're not trusting what their doctors are telling them. They're saying, you know, my doctor tells me this, but I read in a book somewhere that maybe this medicine they're trying to give me isn't good for me. Maybe, what if there's actually a medicine outside in my backyard that would be even better for me? What if there's a better way to build this? What if there's a better way to draw this? What if there's a better way to conduct this business? And I think that people are waking up all over the world, and this great awakening that's happening is the beginning of the new Renaissance. And so I would like to continue to make videos about this new Renaissance and go into exactly what are the signs of this new Renaissance, of what's happening. What are things that are working for our future? What are things that are working against our future? And I'm not proposing to have any sort of theory of some that'll produce some sort of grand utopia to save the world. Not at all. I'm just some sort of crazy artist who loves art history, who loves learning ancient things, and who found through learning ancient things to be able to go from having a disenchanted worldview to be able to go from total nihilism to be able to have a life that I feel like has all of the meaning that I could possibly ever want and ask for. And I think for the individual, regardless of all the crazy things happening in the world, that is really like, that's what you need the most. Is you need meaning, and you need purpose, and you need an adventure. You need to feel a connection to nature, a connection to the people around you, a connection to your household, a connection to yourself, a connection to your family, a connection to God, a connection to your city, your town, your society, all of that. And this, I feel like we're very disconnected in just the way that the system works. And it's not anything that we've done personally. I don't think it's anybody's fault that they feel disconnected. But if you are disconnected and you realize you're disconnected and you don't do anything about that to bring back a sense of unity, oneness, and harmony with yourself and the rest of the world around you, and if you realize that and then you don't do anything about it, then it does start to become your fault. And so let me know what you think in the comments. Is there a renewal of the enchanted worldview, or is there not? How exactly would you recommend that people go about rekindling an enchanted worldview? How do we go about gaining meaning back in your lives? Is there a particular way that you found that you had meaning in your life, like the fire of meaning reignited in your life? What brought you meaning in your life? Is there anything that I didn't list? And I'm sure there's lots of things, because I'm just experiencing life through my particular perspective. And there's so many different perspectives in the world, and everybody could have their own way that they find meaning in their life. So let me know. How do we restore beauty? How do we restore attention to detail? How do we embrace the meaningful parts of life that may be slower and less productive, but in the end are more meaningful in creation? Thank you very much, everybody. If you have made it this far, I really congratulate you. You made it through a whole hour of a crazy artist rant. If you have made it this far, then I will ask that you just like and subscribe the video, because if you made it this far, you at least found something interesting up to that point. So like and subscribe, and then we could be on this journey together of this new renaissance that I believe is happening. You may not believe it's happening. That's fine. If you don't believe it's happening, also write in the comments. Tell me why you don't believe it's happening. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'd love to figure out what exactly I could do to sharpen up this worldview and make it even better. But I think that's all I have to say about this matter for today. We're just at just over an hour. Once again, thank you, everybody, for joining the Elijah Thane podcast. Everybody, hope you have a great rest of your day.